Freddie Mercury stopped his concert for One Lost Child, December 1st, 1977, Madison Square Garden, New York City. 20,000 people were on their feet as Freddie Mercury commanded the stage with everything Queen had to offer. The band was building toward the climax of Somebody to Love, that moment when Freddie's voice would soar into the stratosphere and bring the entire arena to its knees. But instead of hitting that legendary high note, Freddie's hand shot up in the air. The music stopped. Complete silence. 20,000 confused faces stared at the stage as Freddie stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on something in the crowd that nobody else could see. When he finally spoke into the microphone, his voice was calm but carried an authority that made every person in Madison Square Garden freeze. "There's a child down there," he said, "and we're going to find his mother, right now." What happened in the next 12 minutes would prove that sometimes the most powerful thing a superstar can do is stop being a star and simply be human. Queen's 1977 North American tour was a triumph. After years of building their reputation through relentless touring and groundbreaking albums, they had finally broken through to American audiences in a massive way. Madison Square Garden represented the pinnacle of that success. 2 sold-out nights at one of the world's most iconic venues, proving that Queen had conquered not just Europe, but America as well. The December 1st show was the second night, and the band was firing on all cylinders. Freddie was in magnificent form, his voice powerful and controlled, his stage presence magnetic. The crowd was electric, responding to every gesture, singing along to every word, creating that perfect symbiosis between performer and audience that makes live music transcendent. But Freddie Mercury possessed a gift that went beyond his 4-octave range and theatrical genius. He could read a crowd like few performers ever could. Even in an arena filled with 20,000 people, he noticed things others missed: the energy shifts, the individual reactions, the moments when something wasn't quite right. And on this particular night, something was very wrong in the front section. The Hendersons had driven 3 hours from Philadelphia to see Queen at Madison Square Garden. Mark and Susan Henderson had saved for months to afford the tickets in the hotel room, wanting to give their 6-year-old son Tommy an experience he would never forget. Tommy had fallen in love with Queen after hearing "We Will Rock You" on the radio, and his parents thought a concert would be magical. What they hadn't anticipated was how overwhelming Madison Square Garden could be for a small child. The crowds pushing toward the stage during the opening acts, the noise level that made conversation impossible, the forest of adult bodies that made it impossible for Tommy to see anything unless his father lifted him onto his shoulders. During Somebody to Love, Mark had Tommy on his shoulders, swaying to the music. Susan was beside them, singing along, all 3 of them caught up in the magic of the moment. The song was building toward its climax, the crowd pressing forward in excitement, everyone on their feet, jumping and singing. That's when it happened. A surge in the crowd caused Mark to stumble slightly. He reached out to steady himself against the person next to him, and in that split second of distraction, Tommy slipped off his shoulders. Mark spun around immediately, reaching for his son, but the crowd had already shifted. Tommy had disappeared into the forest of legs and bodies, swept backward by the movement of thousands of people, all pressing forward toward the stage. "Tommy!" Susan screamed, but her voice was lost in the thunderous music and crowd noise. She grabbed Mark's arm in panic. They tried to push against the crowd, searching desperately, but it was like fighting against an ocean tide. Every second that passed, Tommy could be getting further away, could be getting trampled, could be terrified and alone in a sea of strangers. Mark tried to get security's attention, but the guards were focused on the stage and the front barriers, watching for crowd surfers and potential rushes. Nobody could hear him over the music. Nobody was looking at the middle of the crowd where a 6-year-old boy was lost and frightened. But someone did see. From the stage, Freddie Mercury had been conducting the crowd through Somebody to Love, when his eyes caught something that made his performer's instincts scream that something was wrong. In the front section, about 20 rows back, he saw a small figure, impossibly small compared to the adults around him, being jostled by the crowd, clearly separated from whoever he belonged with, hands reaching up, mouth open in what Freddie recognized even from a distance as a child's terrified cry. The band was approaching the song's climax. Brian May was building the guitar solo. Roger Taylor was driving the rhythm forward. John Deacon was holding down the thunderous bass line. They were seconds away from the moment the crowd had been waiting for. Freddie's hand shot into the air. His other hand made a cutting gesture across his throat. Stop. Now. The band saw the signal and immediately cut the music. The sudden silence was shocking. 20,000 people stopped singing mid-word, stopped moving mid-jump, stopped breathing mid-breath. The confusion was palpable. This wasn't part of the show. Something was wrong. Freddie stood at the front of the stage, his chest still heaving from singing, his eyes still locked on that spot in the crowd. When he spoke into the microphone, his voice carried none of his usual theatrical flair. This was just Freddie the human being, speaking to 20,000 other human beings about something that mattered more than any performance. There's a child down there, he said, pointing to the section where he'd seen the small figure. A little boy. He's lost and he's scared. We need to find his mother or father right now. The crowd's confusion turned to understanding. People in the section Freddie had pointed to began looking around, the words spreading through whispers that grew louder. Lost child, little boy, blue shirt. Where are his parents? Mark and Susan Henderson heard it and pushed forward, shouting, He's ours, our son Tommy. He's 6, blue shirt. Please help us find him. Their voices were picked up by the people around them and passed forward like a relay. Parents here, looking for Tommy, 6 years old, blue shirt. Freddie remained at the front of the stage, watching the crowd organize itself. Security guards were now moving through the sections, coordinating with the crowd rather than trying to control them. What had been a concert audience had transformed into a search party of 20,000 people, all focused on finding one lost child. Everyone in that section, look down, Freddie instructed, his voice calm but authoritative. Look at your feet. Look between people. He's small. He might be sitting, might be crying. We're not continuing until we find him. The crowd complied without a single complaint. People who moments ago had been jumping and singing were now carefully scanning the ground around them, creating space, helping neighbors check blind spots. Tommy Henderson, meanwhile, was exactly where Freddie had spotted him, about 20 rows back from the stage, sitting on the ground where he'd been knocked down by the crowd surge, crying and terrified, surrounded by a forest of adult legs. He could hear his name being called but couldn't tell which direction the voices were coming from. Every adult looked impossibly tall. Every direction looked the same. Then someone crouched down to his level. A woman with kind eyes. Are you Tommy? Blue shirt? Your mom and dad are looking for you, sweetheart. We're going to get you to them. She picked him up, lifting him above the crowd so security could see where he was. A guard waded through the section, and the crowd parted to let him through. Within minutes, Tommy was being carried toward the barrier where his parents were waiting, both of them crying with relief. Security started to take Tommy backstage to reunite him with his parents away from the crowd, but Freddie stopped them. Bring him up here, Freddie said. Bring the parents too. Everyone needs to see this ends well. The guards hesitated. This violated every protocol they had. But something in Freddie's expression made it clear this wasn't negotiable. They helped Mark and Susan over the barrier and onto the stage, Tommy still in the guard's arms. The moment Tommy saw his parents, he reached for them with a cry that broke hearts throughout the arena. Susan grabbed her son and held him like she would never let go, tears streaming down her face. Mark wrapped his arms around both of them, his shoulders shaking with relief. 20,000 people watched in complete silence as this family reunion played out on the stage. Some were crying, most were deeply moved. All of them understood they were witnessing something far more important than a rock concert. Freddie walked over to the family slowly, giving them their moment. When Susan looked up at him, still clutching Tommy, her face showed gratitude beyond words. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Freddie knelt down so he was at Tommy's eye level. The little boy was still crying, face buried in his mother's shoulder, too overwhelmed to look at the rock star he'd come to see. "It's okay, little man," Freddie said softly. "You're safe now. Your mom and dad never stopped looking for you, and neither did I." He stood up and addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet the real champions tonight. 20,000 people who stopped having fun to make sure one child was safe. That's what matters. That's what being human is about. The applause started small and built into a thunderous standing ovation. People were applauding the reunion, applauding each other, applauding the moment of collective humanity they'd all just participated in. Security escorted the Henderson family backstage, where they were given time to calm down, water, and a quiet space. Freddie turned back to his band. Brian, Roger, and John were all visibly moved. This was not something any of them had ever experienced in their entire touring career. "Shall we make some music?" Freddie asked them with a slight smile. They returned to their instruments, but Freddie didn't pick up "Somebody to Love" where they'd left off. Instead, he sat at the piano positioned stage right. The crowd, still buzzing with emotion from what they'd witnessed, gradually quieted. "I think we need something a bit different now," Freddie said. "This song is about love, all kinds of love. But tonight, it's about the kind of love that makes 20,000 strangers become family for a few minutes." He began playing "Love of My Life." The tender piano opening filled Madison Square Garden, and Freddie's voice, stripped of all theatrical pretense, delivered the lyrics with raw emotion that hit differently after what everyone had just experienced. When he reached the chorus, he did what he often did, extended the microphone toward the crowd, inviting them to sing. But this time, it meant something more. This time, 20,000 people who had just proven they could act as one community sang together about love, about caring, about the things that actually matter. There were tears throughout the arena. This wasn't just a concert anymore. This was a shared experience of humanity, facilitated by a rock star who understood that fame meant nothing if you couldn't use it to help someone who needed it. After the song ended, Freddie stood up from the piano and spoke directly to the crowd. "I've played a lot of venues, met a lot of audiences. But what you all did tonight, that's something special. You didn't complain about the music stopping. You didn't worry about missing part of the show. You just helped. That's who you are. Remember that." The concert continued, and it became one of those legendary nights that people who were there would talk about for the rest of their lives. Not because of the music, though that was excellent as always, but because of what happened when the music stopped. Backstage after the show, the Henderson family was waiting. They'd been given backstage passes by the crew, who understood that Freddie would want to see them. When Freddie came off stage, still covered in sweat and glitter, he spent 20 minutes with them, signing Tommy's shirt, taking photos, making sure the little boy understood that he was brave, that getting lost didn't mean he did anything wrong, that his parents loved him. "Mr. Mercury," Mark Henderson said, shaking Freddie's hand, "you saved our son's life tonight. We'll never forget this." "The crowd saved him," Freddie corrected gently. "I just pointed. They did the real work. Those 20,000 people are the heroes, not me." Years passed, Queen's legend grew. Freddie Mercury became increasingly known not just for his music but for his humanity, his ability to connect with people beyond the barriers of fame and performance. The story of the Madison Square Garden concert spread slowly through word of mouth. The Hendersons told it to friends and family. People who had been there told it to their children, but it never made major headlines because it wasn't captured on official recordings, wasn't part of the planned show, was just a moment of human decency that happened to involve a famous person. Tommy Henderson grew up with that experience shaping his understanding of what it meant to help others. He became a firefighter, choosing a career built around responding to people in crisis, showing up when called, being someone others could count on in their worst moments. In 2015, when he was 44 years old, Tommy was interviewed for a local news piece about first responders. The reporter asked him what made him want to become a firefighter. "When I was 6, Tommy said, I got lost at a concert at Madison Square Garden. 20,000 people stopped what they were doing to find me, and Freddie Mercury, one of the biggest rock stars in the world, stopped his show until I was safe. That taught me that your job, your role, your position, none of that matters as much as helping someone who needs it. That's what I try to do every day." The reporter, a Queen fan, was stunned. "That was you? That actually happened?" "It actually happened," Tommy confirmed. "And it's why I do what I do." The story went viral. Within days, people who had been at that 1977 Madison Square Garden concert were sharing their memories online, confirming Tommy's account, adding details they remembered. The collective memory of 20,000 people validated a moment of grace that had happened nearly 40 years earlier. When the story reached Brian May, now in his 70s, he confirmed it publicly. "I remember that night vividly," Brian said in an interview. "Freddie saw that child, and nothing else mattered until that little boy was safe." That was who Freddie was when the cameras weren't rolling, when there was no publicity value, when it was just about being a decent human being. The Madison Square Garden concert became legendary for a different reason than most concerts achieve legendary status. Not because of the music, though that was excellent. Not because of the performance, though that was powerful. But because of what it revealed about the relationship between artists and audiences, about the responsibility that comes with a platform, about the simple fact that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop the show. Freddie Mercury could have kept singing. The show could have continued. Security would have eventually found Tommy Henderson through normal protocols. But Freddie chose to use his voice, not to sing, but to mobilize 20,000 people to care about one frightened child. That choice rippled through decades. It shaped a little boy into a man who dedicated his life to helping others. It reminded 20,000 people that they were capable of collective compassion. It showed millions who heard the story later that fame is meaningless if it doesn't make you more human, not less. Today, there's no plaque at Madison Square Garden commemorating that night. The venue has hosted thousands of concerts since 1977, witnessed countless legendary performances. But for the people who were there on December 1st, 1977, that concert stands apart, not because they saw Queen at their peak, because they saw humanity at its best. Because they learned that 20,000 strangers could become family when someone needed help. Because they witnessed a rock god choose to be simply human at the exact moment when that humanity mattered most. And because one lost child found his way home through the collective compassion of thousands, led by a man who understood that the greatest performance isn't the one where you hit the highest note. It's the one where you use your voice to help someone find theirs.